You said 10 years, and that's it. You told me that.
Yeah.
You changed your mind. Why are you running?
Well, I honestly thought that I'd only serve 10 years, but circumstances changed. But I did say that, and I own it. I admit it. But there are things that frankly are left undone that I think if I can serve another term, particularly if we get the White House and keep the majority in the House and get the majority in the Senate. And I just had a lot of people come to me saying, you need to stay. So Ann and I talked about it, my wife and I talked about it, and decided that there are things that I need to do. And so I agreed to run another term.
If you win this term, you do have competition. If you win this term, you stay another term, two more years. If you have the White House, if you have the House, if you have the Senate, will you get done what you believe you are that close to doing now?
I believe that we have a window to really get our country back on the right track from a fiscal perspective, but also in a foreign policy perspective as well. And I've been working on some things for a couple of years now. And this is one of the reasons that I decided to run again. I've been working for the last couple of years to try to create a Western Hemisphere alliance, particularly focused on South and Central America. In the year 2000, there was only one country in South America where China was the primary trading partner. It's completely reversed. And a lot of those countries are realizing that China is really not their friend, but we've abandoned them. So I'm actually advising the Trump campaign on this and on energy and critical minerals. And I believe we got a path forward where we can rebuild relationships in our own hemisphere, in our own neighborhood, literally. And it's vitally important to the future of the country, and particularly as a soft power alternative to China. There are other things that we're working on in regard to the regulatory state. And the first 3 years in office, Biden's added well over $600 billion in regulatory costs, which is very inflationary. Yes, I try to remind people that businesses don't pay taxes, they don't pay for regulations. The consumer does, we do. And it's not that we're anti-regulation. What we are is anti-uncertainty. That's what drives capital out of the marketplace, and like I said, very inflationary. And then on energy, in the first week in office, literally, President Biden shut down the construction of the XL Keystone Pipeline that would have brought in 835,000 barrels per day of Canadian oil. Instead, we started buying 600,000 barrels from Russia. We've literally helped finance their war. And there are things that I think we can do in those first 20 months that will unleash our energy power. We're literally an energy superpower. That we can do things in the regulatory arena that really force us to legislate, because what's happening to us, and I tell people all the time, we've lost representative government. When you have government bureaucrats that are faceless, nameless, you didn't vote for, they were there before I got to Congress, they'll be there when I leave, making laws. And again, we're not just anti-everything regulation, but when an agency passes a major regulation or a new rule, Congress ought to have to approve that. We ought to be accountable to you, to the voters, for these laws, because it's the same thing as laws. And I really think we've got a huge opportunity there that it's going to make us more secure and more fiscally sound. My first 2 terms I was on the Budget Committee, Pam, and got to know Jody Arrington, who's chairman of the Budget Committee, and we have a budget that will actually balance in 10 years with no gimmicks. And I think we can get our debt to GDP, and I know that's a little nerdy, but gross domestic product. Right now it's at 120, almost 128%. Our debt is 28% bigger than our entire economy. I think we can get that back down to in that 60 to 70% range where it's manageable, and it's going to take at least 15 years to do that. And that's
But you're not going to be there another 15 years.
I am not going to be there another 15 years, but we can launch this in the next 2 to 4 years and get us there and do it in a way that I think it's sustainable. And so that's a long answer to a short question.
Well, but an important question. Another important question. I've interviewed you many times. You were not always confident of Donald Trump. This year, you've got Donald Trump running. You have chosen over Nikki Haley, who says she's in it to stay. Can you explain why?
Well, I was not a Trump supporter when he was running. When he got the nomination, I supported him. But then he is totally different in a meeting than he is on stage. And he is one of the most remarkable people I've ever worked with. He is very intelligent. He's a very quick study. And as you know, I've ran a think tank for almost 25 years, and I did a lot of work in Washington, and I would go up and work with various administrations, and it's usually on a staff level. And I almost got to the point where I was convinced that somewhere in their job description in the fine print it says it doesn't matter how good the idea is, the answer is no. Or if you do get to the senior staff or the cabinet level, the president wants you to go do a poll. That's not Donald Trump. And giving an example, when we were trying to get the health care bill passed, we were sending out $30 billion a year in improper payments just on Medicaid. And over half of the problem was at the federal level. And I wanted to do something that we'd been trying to do for 25 years, and that was to get the Medicaid block granted directly to the states and let the states manage it. They're much better managing the money that they're using to help their people. And I was invited to the Oval Office, sat down with Trump, and I mean in 10 minutes he said, that makes sense, I'm in 100%. He didn't turn to a staffer and say, go do a poll, do that. And we got that in. I also wanted him to include work requirements for able-bodied adults with no children. He said he's in 100%. And then later, if you recall, that was in 2017, Paul Ryan had to pull the bill. And I had an amendment to cover people with pre-existing conditions because insurance for people with pre-existing conditions goes through the roof.
Yes.
And the state of Maine had set up a guaranteed benefits pool. And having been in the think tank world, I knew about that. I knew the guy who wrote the legislation. So I sat down with them, and we came up with a bill to create a guaranteed benefits pool as an amendment to the health care bill. Went back to the White House. We're in the cabinet room talking about this, and being, you know, I'm a complete nerd, so I had in my pocket a sheet of paper. It had a bar chart on it. I got up and walked around and stood beside President Trump and said, Mr. President, you see this number here? That's what the general population in Maine was paying for premiums. This number down here is what they're paying today. Well, there was a middle number. Adult non-smokers in New Hampshire paid more than the general population of Maine. Same insurance company, but Maine had that guaranteed benefits pool. And we'd had an outside group come up with how this would impact premiums. It would have lowered premiums in every age group. The president looked at the Secretary of Health and Human Services and said, is this right? And he said, yes, sir. And that's how we got it in. He understands numbers. And if you come in and make the case, he's going to be on board. I'd never worked with anybody like that. So I think if he can get back in and people can put up with some of this idiosyncrasies, we will get some major things done. And I think that first 2 years is going to be critical.
You put your own name out there to be Speaker of the House. That doesn't sound like Gary Palmer.
Well, it doesn't. And as I told people, because I had a lot of people saying, you really ought to run for Speaker. And my response was, I'd rather you shoot me in the head. But we would go into these meetings. It was so contentious, Pam. People just weren't listening to anything. And my best friend in Congress is a guy named Bruce Westerman. He chairs the Natural Resources Committee. And Bruce and I were trying to get up and say, obviously we need a person as Speaker, but we need a plan. Well, you couldn't talk. People just weren't listening. And we knew the only way that anyone would listen to a plan was if one of us ran for Speaker. And Ann and I go to early service church and then Sunday school, and I just came under conviction that one of us has got to do it. And so after Sunday school, Ann and I were sitting in my pickup truck in the parking lot, and I called Bruce and I said, what are you going to do? And he said, I just can't do it. Well, 7 minutes to go before the deadline, I put my name in so that I could lay out a plan for how we could change how we do appropriations and how we could move forward. And and I'm really glad I did. I went 50-something hours without eating, but it was nerve-wracking. But I'm glad I did, because I think we've got some ideas. If we can get everybody to just calm down for a little bit and work through this, I think we can put together a way to make sure we get our appropriations work done first and then move to the other things.
A question that a lot of the public has, the voting public has, is I think two things. Number one, will there ever be compromise again on Capitol Hill? And number two, how much more money do we put out for foreign aid to help Ukraine, and what are we getting back in return? And I realize that you may be limited in what you can say on that, but I think those are legitimate questions for the American public.
I think those are legitimate questions, and it's one of the reasons why I'm not supporting additional aid for Ukraine until somebody can sit down with us, and it has to be from their side of what this end will look like, because we're not going to engage in an endless war, and my heart goes out to those people. I know a lot of those people. There's a huge movement of evangelicals in Ukraine. I know of people literally having to take up arms. But there has to be a definitive way to resolve this. And I'm working on that with some of them. I think there is. I'm not at liberty to share that at this time. But there are other things that I think they can do. We have an enormous need for critical minerals, we've become so reliant on China that it's now a national security issue. And that's another part of what I'm working on with the Trump campaign on, is energy and critical minerals. But I think there might be a way where Ukraine could help itself by purchasing weapons from European allies or from the U.S. and using their mineral resources as collateral, like uranium, for instance. We're buying uranium pellets from Russia to fuel our nuclear reactors here, when we could be getting them from Ukraine. Yeah, and put them in a position where they can help themselves instead of us trying to just foot the bill for them.
I'm a long-time debater. I love to talk, but I'm curious, does anybody debate and then compromise anymore on the Hill? And are we ever going to get back to a point where we feel like our leadership is not in it for the party, but in it for the people?
I think social media has almost destroyed the ability to have an honest debate. And this is both sides. I really think we've got too many people in Congress that think Congress is a reality show and that they're celebrities. I'm in leadership. I'm on the steering committee that determines who gets on a committee or who doesn't. And there was a member that didn't get any of the committees they asked for, and his general consultant called me and
wanted to know why.
Yeah, wanted to know why, and he said he thinks you don't like him. I said I don't. I mean, I'm brutally honest, because I want to help people. I want to help people succeed. But if you don't confront them with the truth, they're not. And I said, this individual needs to understand that this is not a reality show. It's Congress. This individual's not a celebrity. They're a member of Congress, and if they're willing to work, it doesn't matter my personal feelings toward them, I will help them. And we've kind of gone to the extremes now.
Oh yeah.
And it's so social media driven. They're constantly getting hits. There was another member went into a committee chairman and said, as a freshman, they should chair a subcommittee. And the chairman said, well, what are your qualifications? And their response was the number of followers on their social media. Well, there's a little bit more to it than that. I mean, you got to know the subject matter. So I'm hoping and praying that people will start looking at the qualifications of the individual and the experience, because we're at a critical time in our country where we've got to come together. We've got to find a way to come together. That doesn't mean you got to compromise your values, but we're at a pivot point in history. I really believe it, And when you're so divided like this, it creates a tremendous amount of uncertainty. And I can assure you, in foreign policy, uncertainty is one of the worst things you can have. And my last point on this, and going back to Trump, while he was in office, I had breakfast with an ambassador from one of our key allies in Europe. And the media was leading you to believe that they all despised him. And we were talking about other topics, and I just eased it into the conversation. I said, what do you think of President Trump? And the response was, we like him. I said, well, why is that? And the response was, because when he says something, we know he'll do it. Certainty matters in foreign policy.
Final question then to you, and you brought former President Trump up again. Does it bother you because of all of his legal issues, because of things that he says? He can be blustery, obviously, but that's what the public, that's what the world sees. Does any of that bother you, and if so, how do you get past it?
Well, when he was in office, like I said, and that one individual ambassador is not the only one I talked to. I talked to a lot of them, and they really liked him because they saw him, in the meeting setting, not on the stage thing. My biggest concern right now is.
Your mic just dropped out for some reason.
Uh-oh. I promise you that question, one more, and we'll let you go.
I don't know why we just put any batteries in it. If something happened.
China.
It just got hacked. It's not an AT&T wireless.
That's it. There you go. You did just put those in. I watched you.
I know.
I mean, I know we're long-winded, but
Not like that.
not that.
It's just got inside.
Okay.
All right, let's try this.
All right.
Still rolling.
Okay, I'm not going to repeat the question, but the whole thing, but just, are you concerned with some of Trump's blusteriness, with his legal issues, things like that?
Well, I mean, by now the country knows how he is, and I really think that he's going to win again because they're able to see past what you call the blusteriness to look at the policies. We're at a point, Pam, where literally they're young people who've gotten out of school, gotten out of college. They go out and try to buy a car and they can't afford it, or they've worked and married and they want to buy a house and they can't afford a house. We got people going in the grocery store buying store brands because they can't afford the name brands. And my wife Ann just sent me a picture. She likes a certain product, and she has the box that she normally bought, and then put it against the box, the size now, shrinkflation.
Shrinkflation.
And sent me a picture. And that's where we are, and I think people are struggling. And then you have the whole situation at the border. There are more people across the border in 2 months under the Biden administration than the entire Trump administration. So I think people are able to look at his personality and look at his policy and decide the policy matters. As far as what's happening to him in the courts, that is a tremendous concern to me because I do consider that a threat to democracy. This is unprecedented, and I think it is enormously damaging. Totally aside from President Trump, because people are starting to believe that we don't have an impartial justice system, that it is that there's one for one group and one for everybody else, and that is enormously concerning to me. And I think that we've got to address this because I think everybody's vote should count. I think we need to hear different opinions. You don't learn anything if you're in an echo chamber with everybody else. But we've got to make people believe that their vote matters, that their government actually represents them, that when they elect somebody to go there, that's who's making the laws and not some nameless, faceless bureaucrat. And that's going to be a huge challenge for us. And again, another reason why I want to go back, because I think I'm actually working on something with the Budget Committee that I think could be transformative. And we've tried for over 10 years to get this done. I think there's a way to do it. That I'll save it for later.
Okay, we'll be listening for that. Final question to you. If you go back and you have someone comes to you and says, what is your number one priority for your next term? You've named a lot today.
Yeah,
What's your number one?
Securing the border is number 1A, and 1B is dealing with inflation. The inflation numbers are compounded, and when they say, well, inflation's only down to 3%, well, it got up to 9%. So cumulatively, after 3 years, it's over 17%.
And prices are not dropping.
And they're not dropping. Every time inflation goes up another 3%, prices go up that much. But we have to secure the border. That, too, is a national security issue. And I've been to the border multiple times. I understand people coming, trying to get here for a better life, trying to get asylum from persecution in the countries they're coming from. But that's not the majority now. And the last time I was down there, I found out that the cartels charge less to the people who turn themselves into the Border Patrol than the ones that don't want to get caught. And you got to ask yourself, well, why would they do that? Because when you turn yourself in, you get a health exam, you get a phone, you get transportation. So why would you want to get in and not get caught and pay more for that? I also found out that the cartels have set up payday loan operations in the U.S. They're involved in banking. They're literally people making payments to the cartels. They loaned them the money to get in.
To get in.
And now they're making monthly payments like they would on a car payment. And that really concerns me because there's about 1.6, 1.7 million people in the last 3 years that got in and got away. And we think there may be as many as 800,000 more we never even saw. So that's the kind of stuff, honestly, that'll keep you up at night.
Well, we thank you for your time today, and we appreciate it, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks for having me on, Pam.
All right.